the title of today's panel is posed as a deliberately provocative question. Working without the pressures of success. It is blatantly controversial and intentionally designed to challenge how we define success for women in the art market. And I really hope this conversation prompts us all to reflect on that a little bit more today. Because while it's easy to point to signs of progress, and progress has been made, the reality is that we are nowhere near as far as we think we are. And women, both artists and market professionals, are still significantly undervalued in the secondary market when it comes to visibility and value. So this panel was inspired by research that we've been doing here at MyArtBroker for our recently released Female Printmakers to Watch in 2020 Audit Market. Thank you. So we're inspired by our recent report, which you will hear me reference several times throughout this conversation. And within this report, we've looked at performance sales, collecting behavior, sales data across dozens of leading women printmakers. And the goal was not just to spotlight rising lanes, but to better understand where women stand in the market today and where the gaps remain and exist within the progress systems that we all work in. And that includes auction houses, galleries, sales platforms, and the art historical narrative that continuously frames women as exceptions and not equals. So the questions we'll be exploring here today, they are not simple questions. And in speaking in each one of the panelists, one thing became clear is that these issues, these complexities are layered and they're multifaceted and there are no easy answers. So we are going to try and unpick that today, which opens up years of biases, market psychology, and structural barriers. And we're not going to solve it all tonight, but at least these sort of conversations allow us a space to continue moving forward and talking about these issues proactively. So let me introduce our speakers. To my right, we have Jacqueline Harvey, founder and director of Women in Art Fair and longtime advocate for equity and representation. To my left, we have Jess Bromovsky, sales director at MyArtBroker, specializing in American pop and secondary private market sales. And last but certainly not least, we have Carolin von Massenbach, head of print and multiples at Bonhams, bringing very coveted insight straight from the auction room. So, without further ado, let's begin. I want to open the conversation by returning to the second part of our panel's title. Why do women still, quote, lag behind in resale value? And I'd really like to unpack what this means, because we often talk about inequality in terms of access. Who gets exhibitions, who gets funding and representation. But we talk far less about what happens when a woman's work enters the secondary resale market. And within our Female Printmakers Report, we have discovered that this is where one of the biggest value gap rate lies. So, Jess, I'd like to start with you because you bring a very unique perspective, given your expertise. You've spent years working in the American pop market, which is largely dominated by male blue chip names. And each one of these artists holds incredibly strong resale value. Could you help us understand what has built that strong foundation for these male artists, and why is it so much harder for women to reach the same level of representation?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I can start by at least beginning to unpack that a little bit. I work in the American pop market, and it's very dominated by male artists. You've got Andy Warhol, you've got Roy Lichtenstein, you've got Keith Haring, you've got Jean Basquiat, and they're some of the artists with the biggest names out there and the biggest resale values. And often, who we have the most demand for when it comes to people looking to buy prints, editions, originals, the whole lot. And I think that one of the most interesting, or one of the places to start, is the sort of deliberate ecosystems around these artists, these male artists. You know, they had institutions, they had dealers, they had collectors all together working to build their market and to sort of make them a brand of themselves. If you look at someone like Andy Warhol, he wasn't a celebrity in his own right. You know, he was creating art, but he was attacked by the media, he was celebrated by the media, the art was making was very easily digestible. And that's a reoccurring theme actually with all the American pop artists. But the female artists at that time didn't have that same infrastructure and they didn't have that same support. There was no one there being like, let's put on a brand exhibition for you, let's do a media stunt that knows all the biggest newspapers are there. And I think initially that is so fundamental to an artist's career, to sort of just knowledge around these artists. So I think that the foundations that were there for men just weren't there for women in the same way in the 20th century. And that's all to do with these sort of social biases and lack of representation. And I think, and even if you look at it on a broader spectrum and you look at it in terms of art history, we are constantly thinking about male artists in terms of art history. You know, and that's what you're taught. You're taught that at school, you're taught that at university, you're taught that through the way galleries and that to speak.
Jacqueline, I would like to bring you in here because I think Jess touched on a lot of points that you and I spoke about in our conversation. I want to turn to how success is measured in the art world. You and I have spoken about what we refer to as masculine code of value, how fast sales, high prices, and name recognition, how these are often the standards in the art market that get rewarded. Could you explain for us what exactly we mean by masculine coded value and whether you think those same ideas still shape who gets recognized today?
Thank you, Sheena. Hello, everyone. I might be slightly hoarse from last night. It was a big night and still dehydrated somewhat. When we're talking about the ecosystem that exists around the history of art and the sales that are going on now and even in the last century, we're really talking about the sociology, the foundation of society, which is and has always been patriarchal. So art exists as a sub-bubble within the wider society. So if we look at women's rights and everything that we've attained over the past few decades or centuries, it's still a patriarchal society. So these structures are still in place, and everything, most, even today, most structures are still patriarchal. On Wednesday, I was in the House of Commons at an all-parliamentary group about what women want, big survey, started 30 years ago. The head, Helen Frankenthaler, read out a statement 30 years old of what we have still not achieved today. We've moved nowhere. So these structures within the art market are still relevant, they still exist and need to be broken down. On a practical level, as a gallerist, before we started the art fair, we would see so many female artists coming to us wanting representation, and we couldn't understand why that was. Okay, there's more female graduates, art graduates, there'll be more female on every level, but they simply will not have the same opportunity. The galleries may not see the female artists as being commercial enough. So it's that definition as commercial. Then you've got value, whether the work of a woman is valued the same as a man. And when you look at the volume of invisible work that women do, This is work that's not even recognized. And then you look at their creative work, and most creative work started by women. They're always creating but a lot of it has been recognized. Oh, it's craft. Oh, it's this. It's been put into these categories that actually allow the devaluing of our art. So it's of many layers that you're going against to really readdress that imbalance, and it's a lot of work, and it's big, because you need a critical masses going on for women to change that ecosystem. And I always say turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and the men, they're not going to vote, to share. So it's a big job for us to continue to do the initiatives like Women in Art Fair. And I'm sure the auction houses, they have a big role to play in this as well.
That segues nicely into Caro for our auction house insights. From the auction room, I would love to hear how you think success is measured. For example, when you are curating sales and setting estimates for women artists, how do you navigate the fact that historical sales and much of the reference data that we use to gauge value is overwhelmingly from male artists, which ties into the point about invisibility? Does this make it more difficult to confidently price and position women's work in the market?
Thanks very much, and also for having me. And I would like probably to split the questions into two parts, because obviously in this panel we are from different roles within the art landscape, and I'm basically representing the auction house in the town. And as an auction house, we are basically the mediatory between the buyer and the seller on the secondary market, and we really price works independently based on quality, condition, rarity, and market demand, and previous auction records. So that's one thing. So very object focused, I would say, and definitely gender neutral when it comes to the pricing of the objects. We value what we're basically looking at, the object itself. But we also think we have a very strong and important responsibility, and that our educational program comes into place. At Bonhams, for example, we are very much see the responsibility to really feature and celebrate female artists across various categories. So we do that from our modern British department to 19th century, from post-war contemporary, really to prints and multiples. And we really actively promote the visibility and appreciation of female artists across various movements and periods. This is through various sale formats as well as special exhibitions. Just to name a few, for example, our post-war contemporary department, they organized a beautiful selling exhibition, and it was called "The Medium is the Method: Women Artists in Contemporary Art," or we even launched a sale fully dedicated purely to female artists and modern British artists, called "Blazing a Trail: Modern British Woman." It is a collaboration between our Modern British department and Prints department, and we've really achieved stellar auction records, like for these beautiful pieces by female artists, unique pieces as well as prints, and we really pride ourselves to take this very important responsibility as well, to shine really the spotlight to artists and works that are may seem undervalued.
I think what everyone has touched on so far is so important, because it's initiatives that are being made. There are clear initiatives that are being made for women artists at auction houses. There's clear initiatives that are being made at institutions at art fairs like we are. We do what we can at MyArtBroker as well in terms of the education. So there's clear initiatives, but then we also have these complex issues on paper, and we see them. So it creates this sort of paradox a little bit that, is difficult to address, and it's conversations like these that make that possible. So I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit to this idea and concept of what is referred to as tokenism, which questions whether the visibility of a small group of a small select grouping actually signals real structural change, or if it simply reflects isolated exceptions. So I bring this up for global recognized women artist names. I'm talking Yayoi Kusama, Bridget Riley, Louise Bourgeois, Tracey Emin, Helen Frankenthaler, just to name a few. There are many others. These women artists are often held up as success stories. Their bargains reflect what we spoke on earlier, which is traditionally masculine coded standards of value, high sales for original prices, and an incredibly strong institutional backing and recognition. And our Female Printmakers Report, we have showed that there is a growing demand for the editions market in these women's work. So this brings up a question. How do the success stories of these select few artists, how does this open doors for others? Or does it not? Does it reinforce this idea of tokenism by highlighting just how select few artists have actually broken through to that legislation? So, Kara, I'm going to come to you first. You've mentioned in our conversation that institutional ships like Tracey Emin's upcoming exhibition at Tate Modern in 2026 and also her growing presence in Italy. You've mentioned how these can generate market interest. Do you find that this type of spotlight helps build interest around editions and the broader market, or do they work for unique works of auction?
Yeah, a very interesting question, and I would definitely say 100%. Like, if there's like institutional shows do really play an extremely important role to drive interest. What we see a lot, for example, as you said, with Tracey Emin and her show in Florence, as well as next year at the Tate Modern in London. We see a spike in consignments for this particular artist, and it's on the selling side as well as on the buying side, because people are very curious to hear about it and want to learn more, and then also want to acquire the pieces ultimately. So definitely, I would say 100% exhibitions, educational programs do help a lot. And that's one thing. And you asked me obviously about the unique pieces as well as the editions. Like we, for example, just seen recently Marcel Dumas painting, achieving a world auction record of $13 million, I think it was. Is that correct?
I can't quote the exact price, but I think it was in the May auctions. But yes, Marlene Dumas, big round of applause. She did set a new record with an artist.
Exactly, I think it was actually 30.6 million.
31.
13.6, no?
13.6.
Oh, sorry, 13.6.
Yeah, 13.6, I think, yeah. And but that's because you asked me about unique pieces and editions, and obviously, again, there's a slight difference, right? Like it's not so much the work, or let's say like there's a difference between obviously unique pieces and editions, but also if there's a major exhibition around an artist, we definitely see a spike in the edition market. It's just differently visible because editions, the price range is just slightly different compared to a unique painting. But her Marlene Dumas editions do really well, but it's just not, unfortunately, they don't make 31.6 million, but they perform very well at auction.
So I bring this up, original artworks versus editions, because this idea and concept of tokenism, it's not just isolated towards an artist. It actually extends to across different formats, which include different types of artworks. There's different markets for originals and editions, and how those women gain recognition in both is super important. So, Jess, building on that and that idea of visibility, when we look at the editions market specifically for female artists, for example, for Tracey Emin, whose editions are starting to gain momentum, or if we look at Bridget Riley, whose editions have been around for decades, this still feels like the visibility is uneven compared to their male counterparts. If you are Moderator inside, what do you think is holding their print markets back? Or not even their print markets, but that level of recognition? Is it branding, visibility, or is it something else altogether?
I think that there is so many different factors when it comes to this. But I think one of the very interesting things that I know we touched on a little bit is sort of the wording and the description that goes into these artists often. So when we talk about Riley or we talk about Emin, they're often described incredibly as sort of like very in-depth, very intellectual, very emotional. You know, the words associated with some of their art was quite different to maybe how you would associate with some of the male artists. I reference Wall just because that's the markets I work in, but you know, they're spectacles, they're recognizable, they're brands. And sometimes I feel with people like Riley, who, you know, in the 60s won the painting prize at the Venice Biennale, you know, she's had institutional backing. She's had so much value in originals when she sells, but actually there's still something holding them all back and still so many barriers to go through. A really interesting comparison actually is Kusama, because Kusama acts in a very similar way to Warhol in terms of the way she brands herself. You know, she has very iconic imagery, the pumpkins, the light show, the Tate Modern, you know, all of those very recognizable things are there, yet she didn't gain recognition when she was in New York. She went back to Japan. She built her market up there. She came back. And so there are all these biases that are there that women still have to back in a really interesting way to men.
So I'm getting really excited here because I feel like so many relevant and strong points are being made. I think with the takeaway from what Jess just said is that branding and visibility doesn't always extend to women in the same way as it does to males. Yayoi Kusama, for example, has that, but it doesn't extend in the same way. And Jacqueline, I really want to bring you in here because you made a very powerful assertion when we spoke here one-on-one. And that was that artistic creation is genderless.
This is.
So,
This is genderless.
could you help us unpack this a little bit? Because if art is inherently ungendered, why do so many women fail to reach that iconic pyramid status?
Well, I think that, you know, it's a number of factors, and we've touched on those factors. And especially when there is so much creativity within all of humanity, you know, and we're capable all of doing something, the gatekeepers, and I say again, the gatekeepers within society decide who they're going to invest in and to what level. And what you've seen with someone like Kusama, even though, I mean, Alvin Medj, you know, she's on that massive, they've taken her, you know, you can get bigger investment, but whether or not it's at a micro level, because she's of a nature, is she controlling every detail? She needs almost like Simon Cowell to come in and say, I'm going to make you a star, literally. And that's what they do with the men. And then they put everything at it. It's a strategy. It will not be 1 year, 2, 3, 4. It will be 5, 10 years, 15 years. They're planning for these guys. And the women don't get that level of investment into their career or into them as an artist. And that's why they're failing. They can literally make anybody a star. They can make any artist big if they want to. They can make any woman big if they want to in the way the system works. But it requires a group of people to come together and say, this is what we're going to do, and follow that system. That's one route, or it's the people that do it. And this is where we come to the people and say, do you believe this person is it? And if enough people each of us say, this is it, and get involved. And that's what's great about prints, because they're at a price point. Never before have women had so much money, earned their own money and wealth under their own control. And all these wealthy business women and all these women that now need to invest in the female artists, and they will make a lot of them big, because there's actually more of us than there are of the men. So if enough women came together and really said, we need to make this woman big, or we need to do this every year, we have our system, let's do this. And even if it stayed just within the female community on planet Earth, it's part of our ancestry, it's part of our community. It is our duty to do it to us, for our own gender, for everybody. We need to do this for women, to make sure that we safeguard these women that have not had the opportunity, or it's not yet. But 9 times out of 10, I see, if it's your time, it's your time. Something will happen. If you're meant to do a thing, it will happen for you. And that's more true now than ever, because of everything that everyone is doing. It's slightly, but it is genderless, so anybody can be a star, but unfortunately more for males than the female.
Thank you so much. I think that's so important to hold on to. I hope we walk away from this panel I hope we walk away this evening with a lot from this panel. But how artistic creation is genderless, I think that is so powerful, and I hope it resonates. It ties into exactly what Jess was speaking on with Bridget Riley. How do you look at a work and assign emotion to that? You can't. So it's really something to consider, and the fact that gender can make one work market worthy and another can. It's a huge complex issue, and Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, these guys were Stefani immediately, and so we're just seeing sort of a different pace happen today, which I think is important to acknowledge. So this brings us right into the next part of the conversation, because if we're really serious about making change and breaking down the system, then we can't just look to the select few names that are at the top. We have to look at who is next. And I think that's really important. So I want to talk a little bit about mid-market artists and also emerging voices. And this one's a little tricky for me, because I don't like the idea that the market gets to decide when an artist sort of breaks through and has their moment. But I do want to talk about collector behavior and how that is shifting, because it is shifting today. And the reports that I read are showing that there are signs pointing to more interest in female artists. So I want to talk about that and how that shapes who gains traction into the secondary market. Caro, I'm going to go to you first. Could you walk us through how you approach introducing newer and mid-career women artists to the secondary market? And what sort of signals suggest that momentum is building for them?
Yes, and I really liked your quote that basically art is gender neutral. It's what you rephrased it nicer, but that's what it is. It's art that was created has no gender, and in a way, what I outlined earlier as well, when we value something, that's really what we do. We really look at the object and not any connection with gender or other things. So that's one thing. We really celebrate artists and their practice, irrespective of their gender. We really want to present the work in the best possible light at auction, and if we feel like there's artists or pieces that are overlooked, we really like to spotlight them through essays, through quotes, through interior short specialist stories, and increase engagement. To widen their auction appearance, and And then what we've done a lot at Bonhams, for example, we've introduced new sale formats like what I raised very briefly earlier, our placing the trail sale, celebrating what a British woman, and this sale really shines a light on basically outstanding female artists of the 20th century, too many of whom were overlooked and undervalued, and it shows a significant artworks, basically both of very well-established names as well as lesser known names, and gives a clear picture really of the century and the pioneering work and how women shaped major movements and were placing a trail for the future. So that's one thing, like a tool that we use at auction, like new sale format and sale concept thematic focus. That was just one example. We've done it with women surrealists. We've done it. We've introduced the first female street artist, Bambi, who had a pop-up screen printing live performance in one of our sale rooms, and she was doing screen printing in her dog mask, rocking the house. But like in general, I think you really do use our sales, prints and multiple sales. I'm talking about prints and multiples because that's my department, to really give people and artists in general a spotlight, but also female artists. And so, for example, we are quite proud that you asked me about the mid-market, that we use the markets for artists like Hannah Gilsman, Bambi, Janet Milner, Anna Singer, where really we, as the auction house, we introduced them to the secondary market, and they now have a proper followership and audience and collector space. But at the same time, we celebrate like the big names that we briefly spoke about, like Tracey Emin, Bridget Riley, Kusama, and so on, and in a way to really give these artists the opportunity to shine all together in the same sale is a really great tool to focus on the importance of female artists.
Thank you so much. And surprise question about, do you think placing, say, mid-career or emerging names, do you think placing them next to more branded names, do you think that gives them more visibility?
I think in general, absolutely, because like, for example, a sale called Hot of the Press, it's like the very big names as well as emerging artists at the same time. And yes, it gives artists the press, and that's the great thing. It's a great responsibility tool that we have to introduce new markets and give people a chance when we feel like there's a big appetite there.
Thank you so much. I think this is so important. I mean, you look around us right now. This is a room full of names that we wouldn't necessarily see in the big auction sales that everyone in the art market follows. So it's really important. Jess, Carol has given us the auction view, but you and I have spoken about how the momentum for mid-career or emerging women artists usually starts sooner. You've spoken about how branding, geography, and primary gallery support, you've spoken how these often shape success stories. Are those factors helping to level the playing field for women artists, or is the system still too fragmented?
Yeah, I think that the primary market is, institutions, the primary market, everyone is now trying and pushing to be more inclusive for women artists. And it's a really big push at the moment. You can see people doing it across the board. But at the same time, I think what's really a really sort of important point is actually educating collectors as much as it happening on the one side. And as you're saying, on like the galleries representing, the institutions representing, but when you get to the very high banding artwork, there's actually a very small pool of collectors collecting those artists and their artwork. And actually you need those collectors to start branching out, buying female artists, to start changing the opinions as it filters down. And I think that actually when that happens, and when that conversation starts changing, then lots of things start changing with it. So that's, for me, a very interesting point. And another one is, it's just all to do with where an artist at the moment can brand themselves, because, like we were saying, female artists at the time of the 20th century, they didn't have these galleries supporting them. But these days, there's actually a lot more ways that an artist, female artist, can be self-sufficient. You know, we have social media now, we have Instagram. And I think actually a really interesting thing now is that a lot of artists don't need those barriers of having a gallery to initially represent them. It's incredibly important, but they can also do a lot of self-promotion and self-branding to begin with to get themselves off the ground.
It all boils down to marketing and, again, branding and what we've been talking about this entire time about institutional support and representation. And there are, as Jess mentioned, there are many different ways now that can happen, which is important. So, Jacqueline, that brings us right to the kind of change that we are trying to build. You've spoken about giving artists more time and more visibility, but also not forcing them into any sort of system that was made for them. What do you think needs to shift in order to help mid-career or emerging artists perhaps break to the next level?
Well, apart from initiatives like ourselves, I think it's going to be, we're in a very, very interesting time, because if you have the technology and the ability, there is a lot an artist can do for themselves, because they literally have the power of creating this marketing machine independently of the gallery or dealer, because it's the connection to the people. And what galleries and dealers and all the structures around artists like to see is the following, you know, to build that people are interested in this. I would still like to see they're interested in artists, but I'd still like to see the non-commoditization of art. That frightens me still, because I feel the appreciation, that connection to the artist, which is what the people can bring, is that one-to-one connection to the artist will, once the artist has got that will help them a lot, that will feed them a lot, you know. So that connection and building that themselves, the gallery will come. It comes, but the artist has got to be very clear about who they are and what they're doing. And once they know their belief in themselves and they have their potential, you know, connected to the source of their creation, I think that, you know, everything it's like a stack. It will just start to drop all in there. So initiatives like Women in Art Fair, we want to be part of the chaos, actually, that allows ecosystems, so galleries. I mean, this edition is a transitional space, because normally we would have galleries, curated space, we'd have the whole industry together, so that anyone can walk in the door and say, okay, it's you. And we've had that with artists over the years, that, you know, they weren't represented before they came with us. There's somebody, like a dealer, said, okay, I want you. A gallery, I want to work with you. And that's the sort of thing that, you know, to just open the door and put the right people in the room so that people can move, energy can move, and people can see in a relaxed environment and say, yes, we're going to move forward to that. I think there needs to be more of that existed, especially because once you start the commoditization, the value, with the link with money, it can all go a bit squiff. And then we've got, like, the top end of the market at the moment is not doing too well, which I feel is great, because it's been like that for too long. We need to break down. There needs to be more deconstruction and breaking down of structures that have been held up for centuries, that need to change now. And I've got great hope for the younger people, that they're going to be moving forward and taking up, you know, the younger creative energy. They're fantastic. They will do so much stuff themselves and just throw themselves in there. But we all need to eat. We all need to pay bills. We all need to do all this other stuff. But if you're prepared to do it all, you'll survive. I survived. You know, survived it.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. It's So important, it's if you analyze the art market like I do, all of the reports are saying, there's a softening at the top and everything is shifting. And it's true. There is a softening at the top. Things are shifting, but we need to be adaptable. As you mentioned, as Jess mentioned, as Caro mentioned, it's about taking this pool of buyers at the top and kind of re-educating on what else there is in the art market, and that's what's really important. So we have covered all the barriers almost as much as we can today. But before we go to the floor with questions, I just kind of want to sort of wrap this up. I want to think instructively a little bit and shift our attention to what actually can be done. So I'd love to hear from each one of you, not just what needs fixing, but what's already working and where we can each play a role within our careers. So, Jess, I'll come to you first. MyArtBroker has been building data-led valuation tools to bring more transparency to the market. Can you explain to us how past auction data can help with building collector confidence in women's artwork and mid-career artwork? How can that help us? And from your experience with clients, what actually shifts perception?
Yeah, I think one of the big things we do that MyArtBroker is similar is that another big issue in the art market is clarity and sort of transparency and all the things that come with value. What an artwork sells for, who sold it. All of these things are actually so behind the screens a lot of the time. So we're doing a lot to push auction data to show sort of where the market is and where the public market is really, or pricing. And so within that comes a lot of conversations with our collectors about, is this artwork valuable? How's the artist doing? What's the past resale values for each art? And I think, again, it comes back to education. It comes back to say the market is now changing. There is a lot more focus on female artists. And these are the reasons why, and these are the interesting ones at the moment, and actually dictating the market much more towards female market. Because at the moment, the most amount of data out there is around male artists. And so it's this sort of circular motion where, well, because all the data surrounds male artists and how successful they are, people then buy male artists' work. And so, yeah, it's about education, to be honest. So much of it. And because we have these conversations with collectors, because of the position we're in, it's really important. It's something that we need to be doing more of.
Yeah, I really hope we see a lot more of it throughout the year, and I'm hopeful. Jacqueline, you feel TWEAF as a model that prioritizes artists and opens up opportunities outside of the mainstream system, but for real equity and beyond just more women's art on the walls. What needs to shift and how value is taught?
Well, I believe in education always. We have to educate the consumers, the general public. The art world is a bubble, and much of the public largely see it as an elitist bubble. It's a luxury, it's not essential to existence. I don't believe that. And so the greater public, which will open the collector base, just because that will ensure the value. So there are collectors that will collect to a certain point and they need education, that the actual public in the schools, what you're taught as for being a value and for winning artists is so important. So we are going down more education, engaging with younger people, and as well as the older ones that have not had, now they're 60s plus, who've not had the recognition. That cross-pollination needs to happen. And if people can, and if everyone can collect and see the value of art in their life, that would make, a far more holistic system and a far more, positive environment. We will continue, and we've got art prizes, we've got a number of initiatives that we want to bring in over the next few years. So we will continue to do our best to make sure that in our lifetime we've done what could be done for female artists.
Thank you. It's so important to hear you guys speak about education and what we're being taught, because this is where this entire question stems. Why do women not get as much representation as men? It goes back to decades of biases and what we were taught decades ago. Well, not us, but Kara, over to you. Bonhams has played a prominent role in introducing female printmakers to the secondary market. Could you share a bit about how you balance that between celebrated work, established names, and taking risks with newer voices?
Yeah, surely. And I think I so much agree to you both. Like education is the key factor. It starts probably with our category prints, tidying up what are prints and how they are perceived, and that it's the most wonderful medium for everybody. This is the democratic medium, so more people could afford art and have all the most incredible pieces of art history in their collection. And that's one thing. But also, like what I mentioned earlier, like that we've launched self-formats called Hot Off a Press, that we really introduce the makers and shapers of the contemporary editions world alongside the very well established. And I have the pleasure also to include new female printmakers and introduce them to the open scene is a very important tool. But also the print department, as well as my colleagues in the various disciplines, they really do their very best to always like really spotlight undervalued artists as well as undervalued pieces, because it's a fantastic tool for us really to tidy up with stereotypes yeah, so we really use our platform, I think, as an auction house in the various departments to really introduce new markets in general, but also for female artists. And I could just continue. We've done so many collaboration with female artists, female printmakers, from Bambi to the Village Contemporary Printer. We work with Janet Miller, with the Eva Pure Charity with Sarah Pope, where we released some editions for the Very Good Cause. Like it goes on, and really using this educational tool and the platform we have to further shape the art world and art landscape.
Thank you so much. We've had some lovely answers from our panelists today, very insightful. Thank you for sharing everything that you know. We have probably about 10 minutes for questions, maybe a little bit longer. So I'd like to open the floor. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure we'd be happy to do our best to answer this. I guess.
What advice do you have for new artists, women artists that want to start exposing themselves more and to sell their art more and be more commercial without undervaluing as well the work that they start?
Well, I think in the first instance, if it depends on the personality type. Some people, they're go-getters, they're happy to be in front of a camera, they're happy to do socials and stuff like that. And if in the first instance they can do that and invite some, like gallery to look at their work or get involved that way, that might be a good start. But the most you can do on your own, the better, because that gives other people, when they look at you, more sense of your work and who you are and where you're going. The more you can try and dig into yourself to whether it's your work, whichever medium you have, the more you can talk about that, put that online in a safe way. I'm not sure about the technology with the AI now, what's going to happen with the intellectual property rights. It's changed everything, and so you have to be careful, really, with the AI situation and IP. The government haven't made a ruling on this yet. So But having said that, it's trying to get feedback, because feedback's very important. It allows you to hone your craft in some ways, see what people like, see what people don't like, see what you like. And it's terrifying, because feedback can be a terrifying process, but it's the only way you're going to know if what you're doing is good. Prizes are a good way as well. Entering these like open calls and stuff like that. They're a really positive thing we see for us, because it allows for the unknown artists to come and for experts to come in and say, okay, we like that. And these are experts with over 20 years experience and stuff like that to say, okay, that's the standard. We like that. And that gives you confidence. So you build confidence in what you're doing, which allows you to expose more and to go a bit deeper and a bit deeper. So
I would fully agree with that, and also add on, can specifically ask, not to introduce your work to the market, in what you said, open calls, for example, at Moderator Temple Print Fair, as you half of the hanging, this gallery based, but the other half of the hanging is through an open call, and I know it because I've always been one of the panelists selecting the pieces, and the quality, of works that has been submitted are, incredible. And I'm looking at these things and thinking, wow, it's stunning. And using the platforms like that to really make yourself known, make your art known to people, and openly exhibit it. And the more you do all this, the better. And that's, as you said, it's also kind of a feedback. And I've been constantly trying, reaching out, and I always think in life, the more you reach out, and you do harvest at some point.
yes.
Thank you so much. Yes, I see a hand in the back over there.
Thank you so much. That talk was really, really interesting. So thank you so much for that. I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form, but I was interested in a few things that were being said. So first of all, in the title, it said working without the pressure of success. And if you don't mind me saying so, I don't know whether that's really been covered, because today was a lot about being successful and how to, make money. So that really wasn't covered. But also, I'm just interested in this idea of genderless art. And I wonder if I could just challenge that a little bit in terms of what women are actually creating. I mean, you only have to look around the walls to see that there might be a slightly different gaze to the one that maybe male artists will have. And I wonder what that then does in terms of whether the work is considered important, or whether the work is actually asking the world to look in a different way, and whether that is the challenge that is being kept down by not really allowing women to come to the fore in the same way that male artists can come to the fore. So there's something about perhaps the story that female artists wanted to tell that challenges the art market. And I also wonder if there's something about the role of art collection, because as I understand it, as a complete outsider, collecting on a certain level really is about moving money rather than about actual creativity and the beauty of the work. So I wonder if that's also very, very important, that what men create on some level actually can embody money in the way that what women create somehow doesn't. So those are the challenges. Thank you so much.
I think that we covered it. Some of the things that you were talking about, we covered, like yesterday at your talk. The commodities, this is what I said, the commoditization, that the making of art always about money is actually quite repulsive to me. But because art is an asset, unfortunately, we live in a culture. The culture has these norms and values. For cultural cohesion, we have these different types of businesses. And the art industry is a business. Men have made it like this. I'm not saying that women have made it. Men have made it like this. So that is why it's overly commoditized. And we had a big talk with a collector yesterday morning about this very point, because the way he spoke was like everything is to do with the market, and the value and investment, and his motivation for collecting, female artists' work appeared but that might be a linguistic issue, because they do not possess the language that we might use. Some people might not possess the same language, and it would be not correct to assume because someone's using the language that they know that they're not actually thinking in the same pathway as you, because it's just a linguistic problem. But I would agree that there is and that's why I say some art has just got to be collected because it's part of our heritage. It's like your family heirloom. It's part of your identity. We must do it. We don't need to make value. You just need to say this is your value, and maybe it's a different part of art. Some art is just for healing. And there's a lot of information coming out about that what is the value of that? If, in the market, they'd say there's no value, but for the people that are healed by that work and it's doing a massive job, that has a value.
Sorry, you like to can I answer that? So I thought that, sorry, I'm the MT of MyArtBroker, so I looked a bit about art as a commercial asset, and I feel quite passionately to your point about but I think it's a bit interesting. We want to talk about this concept of female artists. When I grew up as a kid, when I was 40 years ago, as far as I was concerned, my mother was an artist. She was she was an abstract artist who went around showing in galleries. But my education was about male artists, and so the female artists I knew about were activism artists. They had something to say. They were not commercial entities. And actually, I think that issue that women is culturally constructed, but that issue of women being the ones that create art, picture up and say for emotions rather than emotionability, is almost a problem itself. So I feel very strongly that actually the secondary market is where legacy is made. Until we start buying into the market as female artists and seeing it commercially, we won't see a new generation of female artists become commercially focused. So I think it's problematic, because I understand completely in terms of wanting it to be about, art can be for healing, art can be for 1,000 different reasons other than commercial gain. But I worry that without us positioning ourselves in a commercial context, we will never break through that against what's become before. So I just wanted to say that, because I felt very passionate about it.
And I think we have time for one more question. We'll pick it out here. I'm excited to get your question with the art collector that Jacqueline spoke about. I raised the topic because I made an escalation and said that I knew it was a male collector. I need to ask a question why. And the one accurate answer, I've been thinking about that since. And the answer is, this is by breaking the answer is that when you buy art, doesn't buy it. You buy it if you're not buying for money. You buy it because it talks to you. Something about that piece, you say, I'm going to spend that money because my piece talks to me. And when I look at work around the walls, I would say it's talked to the women who choose to buy it. That's your bias. And the pieces he had chosen for his collection are pieces made by women, but they talk to a man. Yeah. At breaking the bubble, because I've been talking about my work life, I do talk about one of the first things people will tell you is, I don't understand it, but I'm not clever enough, because art is creative, this image that's got to be intellectual. You might not be clever enough. And women are very strong, not only, especially if they've been educated, male art is the art to buy. They're very caught up believing in their own confidence. They like a piece and they can spend money. And I do spend time I will often say to my buyer, I'm nothing, could be like you. So I think you've also got that, and you've got to believe in buy that their taste is a value, having been told for all these years that is male art that have value. And there's more women get money. Those women are out there. If we can convince them that it's worth trying. That's the education, that woman's opinion on what women relate to a piece of art is a value. And I think that is cuts the job. Thank you so much. Jess, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to agree with that, actually. I'd say it's this sort of fluid conversation that we keep coming back to that's changing the mentality, changing the thought process, and that collector level, which filters down throughout. And something that always is brought up is how people look at women's art and how they describe it. And, exactly that, like Riley, Emin, it's always emotional, it's always deep. It's very feminine, descriptive words that go with it. And I think even at that level, it needs to change in order to sort of filter throughout.
Language defines reality. And unfortunately, we can be talking about the same thing, but the words cannot be resonating. And it's a really big problem. When I write books, I'm always thinking about who is the reader and how to communicate with them in a language that they understand, because that's a job. That's what marketing is. It's communicating to people in the language that they understand, in the visual terms, in the words that they understand. And I think at this moment in time, the language and even the discussions that we have, we still don't even have a shared language because this has never happened before, in the history, of women, that we're at a critical point where we have the power to define linguistically what do you mean by what we want to do. And it's very difficult to find that. And with Christian yesterday morning, I think he got what you were saying totally, and he was surprised. And this which comes back to this issue of whether art is gender, I said to him, did he find in collecting any difference between collecting men and collecting women? And he said he did find a difference. There is a difference, but for me, ultimately, in this space and time, we deal with dichotomy, but essentially all are from the whole. We might be different, we might have a different language, but all, and that's why I say ultimately, so a man can be so into a woman's art, he may not make it the same way, but they can collect. The woman, it depends on what we would call inside the emotional intelligence. If you find her very emotional, he might collect totally different from what Chris has done, It all depends on the development of the individual.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad you asked that last question, because I think language is so important, and the market is shifting right now, and I think we're all professionals in the market. We're just trying to find a new language, a new way to communicate new ideas and what's important and what value means with all of the art enthusiasts. So thank you so much. They have been lovely questions. Thank you for asking that. But big rounds of applause.